Welcome everyone to the first session of VISIM for the spring 2024 term. Today, we're going to have a presentation on the impact of delivery vehicles on roadware in residential areas. It will be given by me, and I was planning to introduce myself as I'm now the contact person for VISIM, so I'll be getting emails from me, and I wanted to make sure everyone knew who I was. So I'm a third-year PhD candidate working with Professor Pablo Durango-Cohen, and I studied at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for my undergraduate, studying industrial engineering. And between my undergraduate work and coming to Northwestern, I worked for Amazon in an operations management role, which you will see come up a little bit in this presentation, as I have some connections between the work being done here and my previous work. And so this presentation is based on a paper that we have submitted to the Journal of Infrastructure Systems, and we're awaiting response on. And now I will go into the presentation. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. All right. So I already went over the title. The key contributors are me, Jing, who's on the call. Thank you, Jing, and Professor Durango-Cohen. And I just wanted to mention that work for this project was partially supported by a grant from Telemobility UTC, funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation. Okay. So to get started, I just wanted to talk about where this project came from and how it came to be. So there were a number of projects built off of this Telemobility UTC, the center, and grants related to it. And one of the projects was making the connection between telemobility and infrastructure. And there are a lot of indirect connections between those two things. The one that came across as the most clear was that people being able to do more from home and other locations caused more e-commerce, caused more home deliveries. This is over a long-term trend, and those increased deliveries lead to increased delivery vehicles, and they are traveling on residential streets and could be having a significant impact on road wear in those areas. So we have the very long-term trends of e-commerce growth as the internet has become more prevalent, and e-commerce giants like Amazon have grown significantly. But then there's also the acute spike during pandemic era lockdowns and people getting even more things delivered to their home. So we're going to go over those basic statistics. And then we're also going to talk about the other side, which is what is going on with road wear and how it may also be happening more quickly and the condition of pavement is getting worse. And we'll talk about the maintenance strategies that are currently being implemented. The case study that will be presented is based on Evanston, since we are very familiar with it, and it is a representative sample of a suburban urban area with a lot of residential streets. So very basic e-commerce growth. This is e-commerce retail sales as a percent of total sales. This is just showing the last 10 years of how it has increased from around 5% to around 15%. You can also see the dramatic increase that occurred during the height of COVID-19 lockdowns and the sticking power that has come with that. So it has increased over time, but you also see that spike. And I wrote out the statistics. And then one other thing I wanted to point out, which was pointed out to me at TRB when I had this chart on my poster, was if you look at this general trend right here, and then where the trend is kind of going since it bottomed out in Q2 2022, it's not that far off from a consistent trend that was just disrupted by lockdowns and other activities. So it's just an interesting point to note that this growth in e-commerce may have been more dramatically impacted short term due to lockdowns, but this general trend was still being followed. And so this work still applies when you think about the general trend of e-commerce and the increase in home deliveries. Okay. So the case study that we're going to perform is looking at asphalt pavement on residential streets in Evanston. And how we're going to do that is using longstanding methods for determining pavement lifespan when considering the traffic mix, the weight of that traffic, and the pavement design. And what we're going to be looking at is how you can change slightly the pavement design to keep the maintenance schedules of these roadways consistent with the changing traffic mix. And then the extension that will be performed at the end is the traffic mix changing due to the adoption of electric delivery vehicles and showing how that has a different, slightly more significant impact. And then the maps shown here were sort of the first starting point of trying to show the change in pavement maintenance or pavement condition in Evanston over time. And so the map on the left is the locations of pavement patching that occurred in 2018. And the map on the right is from 2022. And each dot represents a patching spot. And from the left to the right, the number of pavement patching spots increased from about 150 to about 300. And so it nearly doubled in 5 years. And we'll go over those numbers a little more closely on the next slide. Okay, so this pavement patching program is a reactive maintenance program that is done outside of regularly scheduled resurfacing. And the table on the right here shows these changes in the pavement patching program. Like I mentioned, locations have nearly doubled from 150 to close to 300. And then the costs have also increased by about 30%, adjusted for inflation. So the costs are increasing, not just due to inflation. They've increased by about 30% from 2018 to 2022, which is very significant and close to $150,000. So here we're seeing that the road conditions are most likely getting worse due to this increase in pavement patching that's occurring. And so we've got the growth in e-commerce, which means there's a growth in home deliveries, and then this increase in pavement patching, which in turn means there is most likely worse pavement conditions. And we're going to connect those two things and try to account for these changes in traffic mix with the pavement design. So a little bit of literature review. I wanted to include a few papers that were somewhat similar and helped give guidance on how we considered these effects. So these two papers were done on incremental effects on pavement deterioration and serviceability. So what we're going to be looking at is the incremental changes of the amount of delivery vehicles and incremental changes of the pavement surface thickness and how those two things interact and impact the lifespan of the pavement. Another one is this paper was on how to design asphalt pavement for heavy vehicle traffic. And so we're considering heavier vehicle traffic when considering delivery vehicles versus personal vehicles and changing the asphalt design based on them. And then in the end, what we're trying to do is increase flexibility in pavement maintenance strategies and not just sticking with what the status quo is in an attempt to maximize value. And each of these papers presents similar ideas. And the hope is that by being somewhat flexible and slightly changing the pavement design, it allows for simpler maintenance by keeping schedules consistent. All right, so we're going to go back to basics. The ASHO road test was a foundational study and is still used to this day in that it established relationships between pavement performance, pavement design, and traffic loading. And I'm going to go over the ASHO roadway equation thoroughly to show how it's set up, and how it's utilized in this analysis to account for these changes in pavement design, traffic loading, to give the pavement lifespan. I included this map and this snip from Google Maps to show just how close we are to where this road test occurred, Evanston being up here. The road test occurred in Ottawa, where Interstate 80 now exists. And I learned very recently that one of the traffic loops still exists right next to the interstate, and you can see it from Google Maps. It's seen here. So the equation itself, here, N is the number of equivalent single axle loads to failure. So the amount of traffic loading it requires for the pavement to reach a point where resurfacing is required. D is the pavement thickness. And when considering asphalt or flexible pavements, it's a linear combination of the surface, the subbase, and the base. And then the L1, L2 are parameters for weight and axle type that are fixed for this analysis, whereas the A coefficients, we are going to use two different model estimates, one from the original ASHO test and another set based on the small Winston model from this book. And I'll go into a little more detail on what the differences are between those two and why the update exists. So these coefficient estimates, the parameters of coefficients were developed in the 60s for the ASHO road test, and they were built upon this very controlled environment test. And there was some skepticism around whether that really captured what real world results are or were. And so a number of other models were developed, and one of them was this small Winston model, which was built to better represent real world results. And as you'll see later, it leads to shorter pavement lives in our situations, in our scenarios. And then another important point is that a model comparison was performed in 2008 by Professor Durango-Cohen that included both of these models, and it showed that they were sufficient, especially when considering pavement failure. So if you're trying to figure out when the pavement fails, not just like the transition from different levels of conditioning, but actually when it needs to receive maintenance or be resurfaced, that's what they're best for, and that is what we are using both for. So what's shown here are just the differentiation between the coefficients for the two different models. And you see just slight variation, and we'll go into how we use each of these models together and find slightly different results in pavement lifespans. All right, there are a number of assumptions made, and each of them has backing in either an existing project, a construction plan, Department of Transportation statistics, and I'll just go over them really quickly. So the average annual daily traffic of the lowest volume residential street at Evanston is approximately 200 vehicles. This is from the Illinois Department of Transportation. When looking at a map of streets in Evanston, the lowest volume shown on any street, and it represents an example of a basic local road. Pavement design, so this is from a construction project at an intersection where a minor residential street intersects a major street, and it showed the pavement design as having an 8-inch subbase and 3-inch surface. The average urban delivery vehicle weight was found as the medium duty delivery vehicle, which is the most common in urban areas, and that had an average weight of 14,000 pounds. The traffic mix is built off of a previous study that looked into road wear on residential streets. And so it's based on mostly personal vehicles, so cars and trucks, a 5% delivery vehicles, and 5% heavy vehicles, which would be like garbage trucks or buses or things like that. The average roadway width is from the Chicago Department of Transportation. This is from curb to curb. and is used in our cost analysis, the cost of asphalt for resurfacing, also from a project in the suburbs. Mixed density is the standard used for asphalt resurfacing in Evanston. And then the last assumption is a key one for our extension of the analysis, which is the additional weight of an electric delivery vehicle. So at this 14,000 pound delivery vehicle weight, the average additional weight for it to be an electric delivery vehicle is an additional 1,400 pounds, which proves to be very significant. All right, so we've got a baseline pavement, and that's how we're going to start this. Is we're going to have a baseline level of traffic, which we just explained what that mix was and what the average annual daily traffic was. And then we have a baseline pavement, which was also listed in the assumptions. And so what we're going to do is use the Asher-Roger equation to solve for the number of years of this traffic mix that causes the pavement to fail. And this is going to be done for a number of different scenarios, and both model coefficients are going to be used. So the table shown at the bottom here has 3 scenarios given: the baseline traffic, the only change from the baseline traffic being a doubling of delivery vehicles, and then a quadrupling of delivery vehicles. And those are the only changes. No other traffic mix, no other part of the traffic is changing. There's no change in the number of cars or the number of heavy vehicles. And these figures were started out of simplicity, just as a way to represent the change in delivery vehicles that seemed reasonable over these time spans. But it is also backed up in some data from the Illinois Department of Transportation, where the percentage of single unit truck traffic on urban local roads has increased from 1% to 6% just over the last 6 years. And the majority of single unit truck traffic in general is delivery vehicles based on the type of vehicle it is. And so what we see in this table, when you actually go to the numbers, is the years to failure of the residential street. So we're not changing anything about the pavement in this situation. It's just these traffic mix scenarios. And you see that the lifespan of the pavement reduces by approximately 2 years when you increase delivery vehicles from 2 times to 4 times, and slightly less decrease from the small Winston, but it starts at a much lower number. And so you see the impact that this small increase in delivery vehicles is having on the pavement lifespan. All right, then we get into the actual scenario testing. And so this is, we now are changing the traffic mix and changing the pavement design. So to explain that a little more clearly, if you look at this first table, this column is the same as this column from the previous table, because we're not changing anything about the pavement design, we're just changing the traffic mix. And then the further right columns show the changes in pavement design. And so if you didn't change the traffic at all and the baseline traffic is held, and we added 1/4 of an inch to the surface thickness, the pavement lifespan would increase. Very logical. And what we're really showing here is these bolded numbers in both tables show that these corresponding increases in pavement surface thickness and delivery vehicles as a part of the traffic mix. On the diagonal, you see approximately consistent pavement lifespans. And so they stay close to the same while you solve for the surface thickness increase that corresponds to the increase in delivery vehicles, and you can keep the lifespan of the pavement the same with these increases in heavier traffic. Okay. And then the next version is just changing one fact, which is now every delivery vehicle considered is 100% electric. So that's really just adding that 1,400 pounds to every delivery vehicle. And it has a significant impact right away. So this is all based on the small Winston coefficients. So even just the baseline traffic, baseline pavement scenario goes from 9 years to approximately 8 years. And so you see right away that we now need to consider greater increases in pavement surface thickness to have a reasonable pavement lifespan. And the electric delivery vehicles' increased weight, while it could be seen as insignificant, 1,400 pounds out of 14,000, for a number of vehicles that is close to 10 per day, it still over time does build up and does have an impact on the pavement service life. And so we account for that by increasing the surface thickness by more. All right, then we did some environmental analysis on top of just electric delivery vehicles and the idea of transitioning to them. And so the first key point was that the most important thing to keep emissions down is to keep pavement properly maintained. And so this is the idea of the whole analysis is we want to make sure the pavement is not failing more quickly. We want to make sure it lasts the proper amount of time and we're resurfacing consistently as we have been. And then the other point that was a little surprising, but a good point to note, is that modern diesel-powered delivery vehicles do not significantly increase emissions compared to gas-powered cars. So this increase in delivery vehicles would be similar to an increase in cars that is also plausible. And then the point of shifting to electric delivery vehicles is important environmentally because you have a very strong likelihood that these companies see value in shifting to electric delivery vehicles. And it could be controlled from a regulation standpoint because it's all companies and there aren't that many of these companies that could be regulated. And as an example, Amazon currently has about 10,000 electric delivery vehicles as of a few months ago, and they've committed to having 100,000 by 2030. And most of them look like this Rivian van you see right here. All right, now we're going to go into a little bit of the costs involved and how we consider those and justify them. So the materials cost is the only change in direct costs from this pavement design change. It's the slight increase in surface thickness requires additional materials, and each quarter-inch increase costs an additional $17,500 per mile of roadway. And then the other costs, the fixed, the labor, the equipment, remain approximately the same, while the social costs like public disruption and environmental are reduced by keeping the pavement maintenance schedules the same and not needing to increase the frequency of maintenance. And so in Evanston, there are approximately 100 miles of local roadways. And if one were to consider the half-inch increase of surface thickness, it would require an additional 50,000 tons of asphalt, which costs approximately $3.5 million. And the annualized equivalent value at a 5% discount rate is $175,000. And the way that we thought of to account for that is there would be a corresponding reduction in budget allocation to the pavement patching program that we went over earlier. And if you were able to reduce it by 25% back to approximately the value it had in 2018, it would cover this annualized cost of increasing the surface thickness when it is time to resurface each of these residential streets in Evanston. Right, because the difference here between 642 and 493 is approximately 150,000. And so we're getting in the ballpark of this value. So the conclusions, we've covered them in general, but the point is that even having relatively small increases in heavier traffic, this is like going from 5 to 10 or 10 to 20 electric delivery vehicles on these residential streets, or shifting to 100% electric delivery vehicles, has a noticeable impact on road wear in residential areas. And this single change of pavement design that we discussed was just increasing the surface thickness. and it can account for this change in traffic, even if it's very simple. We found that it is cost effective when you consider the idea of the pavement patching program being reduced in the scenario where the surface thickness is increased and the road wear does not fail as quickly. And the last point is that not changing the maintenance schedules, so keeping them consistent, allows for straightforward planning decisions and reduced disruptions, which is what the overall goal was of this analysis. So thank you. I do have a couple potential extensions that came out of discussions with Professor Durango-Cohen and a few that came from presenting at TRB and people talking to me. So if you have any questions on these or anything at all, please feel free to ask. Thank you, everybody.
Very cool, Kyle. I guess I have a question.
Please.
So I know that the focus was and the scope was mainly like delivery vehicles, and then the electric question was, for delivery vehicles that transition to electric vehicles. But I guess as the penetration rate of passenger electric vehicles increases, this is only going to make this even more problematic. I guess I wonder, do you know what the difference in like weight of an average like passenger gas versus electric vehicle is? And do you have a sense of like what impact this might have, and if this could be applied to that question?
Yes. So it's a similar percentage. It's like 10% of the weight. And so it's in the range of the average passenger vehicle going, because I think what I ended up doing was taking like an average between cars and trucks, and it was like 6,000 pounds was what I used for personal vehicles. And so it'd be like adding 600 approximately pounds to that. And why it's not as significant is because of the exponential nature of the like fourth power rule and this Asher road wear equation is going from 6,000 to 6,600 pounds has a much smaller impact than going from 14,000 pounds to 15,000 pounds because it's not linear. And so there is an impact because you are increasing the weight. It just doesn't come out as clearly or obviously, especially at small volumes. Like if everyone switched to electric Hummers from their small gas cars, I think you could really make the point in the same way where it's like very clear. I don't think it's as obvious or evident if you have like a regular adoption curve of electric vehicles for regular cars. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thanks.
Mm-hmm. The other is the last point here was actually a government official from Norway was talking to me about how there is so much talk about their transition to electric semi trucks. And I assumed that the highways in the northern part of the country were cement or concrete, and they aren't. They're asphalt. And so it actually did apply directly was that these trucks, which are the even more extreme version of what we're talking about, right? If you go to cars, it becomes less impactful. But if you go to semi trucks, it becomes all the more impactful because you're talking about 20,000 pounds and then adding batteries. And so their road wear of these asphalt highways, especially in extreme weather conditions where it's very cold, it just becomes more and more significant.
Yeah, that sounds actually very interesting. Yeah. The big problem.
No, he
kind
was
of unforeseen.
Yeah, exactly. I obviously had not considered it, so it was cool to have that conversation.
It sounds like you had an excellent TRB. Only now you're sharing. No, but that's great. I think that's the value, Cal. Like that, as Adrian said, very interesting insights.
Thank you.
Hi, Carl.
Yeah.
Nice presentation. I may miss like the part you talking about like the baseline. Would you mind to go back again and talking about like which baseline you're using and how you finding like the baseline stuff?
Yes. So the baselines were built out of these assumptions. And so the baseline traffic is based on 200 vehicles per day, which is a number presented by the Illinois Department of Transportation for a representative street in Evanston. And the mix is based on a study that was done for how to consider heavier vehicles in rural areas. And so we were looking at slight differentiation from the rural areas to the suburban areas. And so this is very similar to the rural with a slight change in decreasing heavy vehicles and increasing personal vehicles, and then fitting delivery vehicles in as the medium duty vehicles that existed in that study. And then the pavement design baseline was taken directly from a road construction project. So an intersection was being redone, and they had all of the information about the side street that was meeting the main street, and the side street was this representative residential street that had this traffic volume. And so we were able to just use that directly as the baseline pavement, and then increasing only this surface thickness from 3 inches as our variable in pavement design.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I wouldn't call it, it's not the perfect traffic mix. That was another bit of feedback I got at TRB, was doing a street study and actually watching the traffic could be an improvement on this exact analysis that was done, but it still represents a very common scenario, and it could be improved upon with better data.
I see. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Will you be sharing this with the city of Evanston or IDOT or?
Yeah, I got some. Pablo and I reached out to the city of Evanston quite a bit ago during this analysis, trying to get some information from them, and it did not go very well. Hopefully, once we get a response from the journal that it's submitted to, maybe then it'll have the weight behind it, other than just our personal project. But that would be great. I think it'd be really cool if someone actually considered it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like a super practical, and but especially more so that it's using like a real case study with, pretty solid data, I would say.
Yeah.
That they might even have access to like more accurate data.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think it's like, to a degree, it's something that should correspond to our anecdotal notions of what's going on. Like, everybody knows that e-commerce has gone up, so this is kind of like, it'd be a little bit disappointing if they didn't want to, I guess, learn from this. So, but I know that's a little bit idealistic of me. So I was just wondering. Yeah,
I completely agree, and that's sort of why we added that project management part at the end, where it's like, how do you justify the costs? What are the costs, and can it just be covered on its own? And I really think it can, because the reduction in patching being approximately 25% back to the 2018 values was really just because those are the numbers I had. We don't exactly know what the impact would be on patching if you change the pavement design, and it could be more significant. It could be to the point where it's not needed anywhere near as much, and so it could be more than justified.
I have a question about that,
Please.
Cal, which I thought of as you were describing it, and when you presented the two maps side by side, is by any chance, did you notice any repeat locations? I mean, it's not something that it's difficult to do by eyeballing it, but I'm curious. I'm curious if there is like a recurrence.
I think there is. Part of it that's a little tough is I don't know how exact these dots are. Like, if the patching's occurring at one point and then like 500 feet away. I don't know. My guess is they put the dot in the same spot. But I do notice, because when I first got these maps, the data behind them was not evident. And so I actually counted the dots to prove to myself that there was a significant difference between these two maps. And I did it in like quadrants. And so I'd have to go back and find those numbers. But what I remember was there was a lot of repeats because I was going street by street.
And of course, this could reflect like kind of either like kind of unsatisfactory design in a particular location, which is part of your study, but then of course also increased traffic, like overrepresentation of increased traffic in certain streets. And so on all of the, and it could also be, of course, a residents in those locations that are particularly unbashful about calling the city. And so interestingly, like on all those three fronts, one of the things that you sort of see eyeballing it is Northwest Evanston, which is the perhaps the wealthier part of Evanston. And so, which of course is where you expect more online shopping, et cetera, et cetera.
No, and you made a really good point that they, like, the assumptions made, the fact of whether they're exactly correct or not isn't the most important thing, right? These roadways are designed as simple asphalt roads, and the amount of traffic we are pretty sure is changing, and the weight of the traffic is changing. And so what the change in pavement design or what the exact change in traffic, it's more just that there is a potential change in pavement design that will account for the change in traffic.
Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Are there any more questions? I don't want to cut you off. Sorry. All right. Well, thank you all for joining. I hope to see you at our next session on April 5th. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Gongda, by the way, I don't know that you've signed up to speak, but we might still have one spot available in the spring if you might be interested, or somebody in your group as well.
I didn't sign in because like I was trying to take a look and first then think about it. But I would say like if I decide to sign in, I will sign in.
Great.
So thank you. Good to meet you. And yeah, thanks to everyone.
Yeah, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions also. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.